In this episode, International Booker Award winning translator Michele Hutchison talks about the craft of translation, her work, and her translation of We Are Light. We Are Light is an exquisitely translated novel in which obsession, mental illness, and deferred dreams lead to complex, compounding tragedies. Michele Hutchison is a literary translator from Dutch and French into English. A former commissioning editor at various top publishing houses, she has translated more than 40 books from Dutch and one from French. She received the Vondel Translation Prize 2019 for Stage 4, her English translation of Sander Kollard's Stadium 4. In 2020, The Discomfort of Evening, her translation of Lucas Rijnneveld's novel, was awarded the International Booker Prize. Hutchison is also co-author of The Happiest Kids in the World, What We Can Learn from Dutch Parents. To buy the book We Are Light, you may use the link given in the show notes. Welcome, Michele. Thank you for accepting our invitation and coming out to our podcast.
Thank you. Yeah, it's good to be here.
I gather that you were very shy when you were young. Is that the reason you're drawn to reading?
Yes. I definitely felt uncomfortable about talking and worried about saying the wrong thing, perhaps. So I think I was quite self-conscious. And part of my childhood, I lived in the countryside in England, where there wasn't very much to do apart from, go for walks and ride horses and stuff. So reading was obviously, something to pass the time, and I started reading when I was very little, and I read and read and read, and I read all the books I could get my hands on, basically. Yeah, that was a sense of solace, place to go and hide in the books.
Okay, any influence from the parents?
Yeah, I didn't see my parents reading very much. My mother reads now, but she didn't at the time. Not very much, anyway. So I was the real bookworm and getting all these books in my bedroom, and I filled the bookcases, and I started piling them up against the wall. So I had one whole wall that was filled with books just stacked up.
What kind of literature you used to read?
Back then, I read poetry. I can remember reading a lot of Philip Larkin. But I also read things like Tennyson, like classical poetry, or the Romantic poets, or Shakespeare. I think I read all of Shakespeare at the time, and Jane Austen, Thomas Hardy, all the English greats. Not much in translation. It was mainly English literature.
So the University of East Anglia and the University of Leuven and University of Cambridge are among the top institutions in the world for teaching literature. How do you think spending time in these places shaped your literary temper?
I think UEA, that's the University of East Anglia, was massively important in shaping me as a person and also my literary sensibility. Was a really fantastic place at the time with a lot of really brilliant teachers and writers. Creative writing was already happening there. And it was a very relaxed place. We had seminars with a small amount of students. We talked a lot. There was an open door policy, so you could go in to talk to your lecturer and carry on the chat you've been having earlier. There was a lot of support. I wonder about institutions now where they've packed in so many students, whether they get the same kind of support and inspiration that I got back then.
University of East Anglia especially, I think they have one of the best department for translation studies, I guess.
That's right. Yeah, the British Centre for Literary Translation is based there. Yeah,
there are a lot of stuff on the YouTube. So many lectures, discussions, and all that.
Yeah, definitely check them out online. And they record short talks about all kinds of things to do with translation and publishing, and really useful.
Tell about your stint in editing to begin with.
Yeah, so after graduating from Cambridge for my master's, I wanted to get into publishing, and I ended up as a junior at Penguin, and I got trained by a very good editor there, who's still there, Simon Prosser. He showed me the ropes, and I got involved in reading books in foreign languages that for the publisher to acquire, and that became my course, because I could read a few languages and not that many people could. I became like the first reader for books from different countries, European countries, and I became a translations editor, acquired translations, but also worked with English writers as well. So it wasn't only translations; it was also development editing with novelists and non-fiction writers in English.
How long did you work as an editor?
From the late 90s, let's see, and then halfway through 2000s, I moved to Holland when I was pregnant, and I worked in foreign rights for a while, and then became an editor here as well, for a Dutch publishing house. So in total, maybe 15 years of editing.
So you have been translating all the way, or you started late after editing?
I started translating when I moved to Holland. Around 2006, 2007, I started translating. I was selling rights in it, and there's a limited budget for sample translation, so I started making some myself, from Dutch into English.
So why the switch from editing to translations?
I think the things are complementary. Editing and translating are kind of similar activities. Obviously, with translation, you spend months and months with a book, and as an editor, it's weeks. So in terms of time, but in terms of it being a quiet activity where you're concentrating on a text written by someone else, then it's a similar activity. And so I combine both quite a long time. So I translate a couple of days a week and work as an editor on the other days.
That's an interesting observation. Both you look at the same text, you keep on looking at the same text. So, as an editor, when you edit translations, what are the common faults that you look for?
I think it's important to remember that the source text is going to have certain turns of phrase that are not going to translate directly. And so if you do that, then it's going to sound a little odd in English, and it should only sound odd in English if it sounds odd in the original text. So you should aim for something that creates the same effect in translation. And so people say things in different ways in different languages. So, for example, Dutch has got a lot of hands and eyes and shoulders doing things when they're describing movement. So they say, I shrugged my shoulders. But all you need to say in English is I shrugged. You don't have to say my shoulders. Or I picked something up with my hand. In English, you just picked it up. Obviously, the hand is implied. So, yeah, watching out for that kind of thing.
So, when and how did you decide to become a translator, and tell us about your first published work?
That was, like I said, doing samples to sell the rights. And then I got asked by a publisher that I'd already worked with whether I'd translate a book. And I was, I think it was, I can't remember which one came first, but I did a thriller by Simone van der Vlucht. I think that was probably the first one. And then I had maternity leave with my second child, and I translated a book during maternity leave. Yeah. Basically, that was my second maternity leave, and the first one I found really, really boring. So it was nice to have something to do during the second one. Yeah.
So you knew Dutch before you moved to Holland, is it?
No, I learnt it here.
You learned it there, and you started translating once you moved to Holland.
Yeah, I did evening classes in Amsterdam when I first got here, and so it probably took me about 2 years to learn Dutch, all in all. And then obviously I'm still learning Dutch to this day. You know, you as a non-native, yeah.
And you went ahead and you got a booker for your translation. That's wonderful.
Yeah.
Really, really nice. Really nice. See, one thing I keep wondering, because most of the translators that we get to interview, because we are doing a series of interviews with various translators across the world, most of them are UK and some of them are from USA. And UK is mostly monolingual, as I understand, at least. No. So why are there so many translators doing great work?
I think if you come from a basically monolingual country, in that it's not even monolingual. I want to first unpack that and say that's a myth, isn't it? Because there's so many people in England who speak many other languages. Yeah, and there's Welsh, and there's even another official language, and so the monolingualism is a certain section of society that's monolingual. It's the kind of white British people who don't have connections with other countries, and terrified of speaking foreign languages. So it's kind of not cool to try and speak a language with a proper foreign accent. So they'll pronounce French in the way it would sound if it was English, and that kind of thing. So given that background, if you do decide to do languages and you understand how important they are for the world, then you need to be a bit of an activist in promoting language learning in general, and other cultures.
Maybe the institutions that may have a lot of preference for the language as such. I don't know. The language learning is more in UK. I don't know compared to other countries.
I don't think there's great language learning in the UK, to be honest. And I've heard that the universities are getting rid of language courses quite rapidly, which is very distressing. Yeah, and there's fewer and fewer students taking them. So something needs to happen.
So you've been living in the Holland for the last few years, and how will it impact a translator who lives in the same place where the source language is spoken?
Yeah, I mean, you get an enormous amount of cultural knowledge, so you know, and you learn the new slang, and you learn the cultural climate, the political climate. You learn a huge amount of context, which helps when translating. It means I think you have to look less up in terms of context to just understand the what's going on or what the characters are thinking or doing. But living here affects my English, so I have to work on my English and make sure that doesn't become too rusty. So it's one way or the other. If you live in England, then you have to work on your English, you have to work on your Dutch. But yeah, and we'll keep watching Netflix and that kind of thing and call it work.
So please tell us about contemporary Dutch literature and what changes you witnessed over the last 2 decades regarding themes.
Yeah, contemporary Dutch literature. It's so hard to generalize because I think I read too much of it. But I think there is a tendency to write about small things. So people writing about their own experiences, and not to be hugely ambitious in that. Although obviously there are great exceptions of writers who do produce huge, massive books with hugely ambitious themes, like Grand Hotel Europa by Leonard Pfeiffer, which I translated. But I think there's a lot of quiet books as well. There's a lot of writers writing like Dutch painting, maybe. If you think about a very nice quiet landscape, or it's hard to generalize there because there's all kinds of things going on.
Now, if I may ask, who are your favorite authors currently in Dutch?
My favorite writers in Dutch.
Dutch, yes. Is it the wrong question to ask a translator?
Well, yeah, because you're supposed to name your own authors, of course, aren't you? Because then you've got me over a barrel. I can't say anything other than the writers that I translate.
So, do you want me to avoid that question? I'll do. That's not an issue. No, you can't translate all the authors that you like, right? You have limited time.
That's true. That's true. And there were writers that I see my colleagues translate, my fellow translators, and that I'm a little jealous of, but not so many. I'm quite happy with the ones that I work on. Yeah.
Tell us about your interesting interactions with your readers, which helped you as a translator. Readers or critics or whoever reads your books and whoever read your books and give you feedback.
Yeah, I think authors get a lot more contact with readers than translators do. So I don't get sent emails by readers or anyone writing to say they liked or didn't like my translations. I don't have much. I mean, I sometimes look on Amazon and see what reviewers say on Goodreads. And then, in general, people just want to talk about the book itself, don't they, rather than having a specific view on translation. So perhaps it's more translators who are my interested readers, fellow translators, and then we can have interesting technical discussions on the choices we make.
Anything interesting that you can share with us with those interactions?
Those interactions, I work quite closely with other translators from Dutch into English, and we often compare our translations or help each other out, or just say, what would you do with this particular word? And then, I did that today with two of my colleagues. I was looking for a particular term for 17th century clothing, and they were very quick to help me with where to look online.
A lot of clarifications you can get from the internet, right? As a translator, especially about this stuff where in 17th century, 18th century, a lot of stuff will be available on the net, I believe, to help translator these days.
That's right. There's a huge amount, and I can't imagine what it was like to translate before the internet, when you'd have to go to a library and plow through books and hope that you found a book with the right. And also, I don't have access to an English library living in Amsterdam, so I don't think I could have actually lived here and been a translator without buying all the books, I suppose, and having my own library. Yeah.
And then slang and accent, right? Slang and accent in a language. How do you handle them in translation?
It's very difficult, isn't it? Because you don't want to translocate the book into a place with a different accent. So if I suddenly used a rural Lincolnshire accent for a character from, say, Groningen, in Holland, that's a county, it would sound odd to any reader who knows that that's a rural Lincolnshire accent. They wouldn't want that confusion, but they would want a hint of someone having an accent. So you try and find a middle road by using a certain register, a certain casual language, but without using slang words that would particularly mark characters coming from a specific English place, or any place from wherever the translator's from.
Coming from the writing is with rural backdrop and an urban backdrop, there are certain variations in the way they use language, especially in India. We do.
Yeah, I can imagine. Yeah, so I think something does get lost in translation in terms of accents.
So translation is always about coming closer to the original.
Is that your quote? Who said that? I don't know if I agree, though. I don't know if it's about coming closer to the original, because normally I start really close to the original with my first draft, and then I take it further away from the original to do what I need to do to make the text work in English. And then I go through the text a third time, seeing where I've taken too many liberties, and then going back a little bit towards the original.
Now the question is, when do you think that, when do you tell yourself that it's done, translation is over? Because you can keep on tinkering it, because
when you have to hand it in, obviously. It's just the deadline. It was never done. It's just that the publisher's like,
No, you are lucky in the sense that you have publishers waiting for you, but there are so many translators who have to pitch for publishing, right?
Right. If I was doing it without contracts, that would, that's really difficult.
Mm-hmm.
It's the same as writing, though. I mean, when's writing done?
Correct.
You could just write and rewrite forever. It's the same problem.
See, you also co-authored a book, interestingly, that is about parenting, right? So, how was the experience of co-authoring a book, and tell us about the book too.
Oh, yeah. So that's a book about Dutch parenting, and UNICEF. UNICEF showed that the Dutch children were the happiest in the world in 2012, I think. But the recent figures have also still put the Dutch as the happiest children. Last year's figures were the same again. So a publisher commissioned the book from me and Rina Meyer Costa. And so I was taken on board as kind of the co-writer and the editor at the same time. So that was, in a way, it was just an extension of the work I already did as an editor. And I got to write some of it myself.
You lived in Holland for last 2 decades or last 10 years, I think, 1 decade or 15 years.
Longer, 19 years now.
So you can write about parenting.
Yeah, that's true. So my oldest is 19, so I came here pregnant with him. Yeah.
So what is so special about it? Dutch parenting?
About Dutch parenting? Oh God, I think it's about the freedom that children have and the independence that is fostered in them. And I noticed that almost as soon as I started living here, you see like kids going around on their own at a fairly young age, and you see the children all going to school and on their bikes and playing in the parks without parents hovering over them. In London, there's a lot of parents with the children all the time. Yeah, I mean, it didn't used to be like that when I was growing up, and that's something that's culturally changed, and Dutch still seems to be more like the old-fashioned way of letting children go out and play, letting them make mistakes, become independent, do things on their own. Yeah, it's a good system.
Do the Dutch children read books?
No, it's a huge problem here. I wish they did. Yeah, it's often a subject in the papers about education is that the Dutch children have been put off books, and how has that happened? There's a kind of list of books you have to read for school, and they're fairly old and staid, so they're fairly dull classics. So there's always a lot of discussion on should they change this list into something more dynamic, and they do add books by new writers and writers from different cultural backgrounds, and it is updated, but the bulk of the list is kind of a bit old-fashioned and not so appealing. But I don't know what the solution is. I think the school system here isn't very strict, so children are encouraged to follow their own interests, and you only need to pass at a certain level to get to university. There's no like an A+ culture. So it isn't a place where they could say, right, you have to read these books and make them sit down and read them. So yeah, it's a difficult one. My son reads a lot and has a bedroom full of books, but my daughter doesn't.
No, Dutch and English. I have a friend, a colleague who is from Netherlands. He's from Amstelveen, I guess. So I hear that Dutch and English are sonically very different, I felt.
In the sounds, the guttural,
Right.
Yeah, Dutch can sound like someone with a throat infection, can't it?
How does it impact you as a translator?
Oh, the sounds. Well, I do a lot of poetry, and so you notice that certain sounds like there's a lot of Z's in Dutch, G's and W's, and you notice those being repeated in poetry, and also the syntax means that the verbs go at the end of the sentence sometimes, and they're regular, so they all rhyme. So Dutch rhymes a lot more easily than English does. English poetry rhymes by being archaic or by being incredibly clever. There doesn't seem to be anything in between, whereas Dutch you could rhyme without too much effort. And the sounds, so I look for comparable English sounds. So instead of Z's and W's and G's, then it might be S's and N's and I think L's maybe. I don't know.
We can't talk about all the books that you translated. I guess there are about 40, if I am right. Right.
Yeah.
So a couple of books I picked up from the list. One is the Seaweed Collector's Handbook.
Have you got a copy of that?
I don't have a copy.
It's the most amazing book. You should get one. Oh my God, it's got everything in it. It's got the most amazing pictures, drawings. It's got recipes, art, poetry. It's a true miscellany, which is a word for this kind of book. Yeah, and I absolutely love doing it.
Because seaweed is important ecologically too.
That's right. Yeah. There's a whole section about that, farming with seaweed. Using it as food for cattle. Seaweed book is about everything seaweed. So it's about the ecological uses of seaweed. seaweed farming, eating seaweed, seaweed as agar, which is jelly, so it's a gel substance, so you can use it to set substances. But it's about seaweed in art, seaweed in culture, seaweed in films, seaweed in poetry, just everything you could think of about seaweed. Yeah, it's whimsical. So the writer Mieke Swanborn, who lives up in Scotland, she's Dutch, but she moved to Scotland. She just wrote about everything that kind of took her fancy about seaweed, and started researching it and drawing it. And she's an artist herself, and just saw where that took her in terms of, you know, this kind of amazing book that goes in all kinds of directions.
Yes, I have a friend who is doing research on seaweed.
Oh, okay, yeah.
Till that time, I never knew about the importance of seaweed and ecologically, you know, how it is keeping things in check. All that I didn't know. She was the one who told me.
Oh, the oceans, yeah.
Yeah.
It's like the forest of the seas, you can call it.
Yes. The whole biodiversity of the ocean and all that.
Yeah.
And now the Booker Prize winning, The Discomfort of Evening.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Yeah, it's a less comfortable subject than seaweed, you know.
Yeah, please take us through the book.
So the Discomfort of Evening is is about a young girl of 10 who grows up in a farming family, and her brother is killed in an accident, and the family falls apart, and it's about that process of disintegration and the emotional neglect that the children suffer because of their parents' own grief. And it's beautifully written. It's a debut. Was hard to translate because it's got such emotionally harrowing scenes in it. Yeah. It's probably hard to read, but I think it's probably harder to translate because you'd spend more time, you know, and as you translate, you think, you picture everything, and you go through it emotionally as well, I think, to produce the translation.
Was it a commissioned project or you approached the author for translation?
No. I got commissioned to do the translation. The Dutch publisher got me to do a sample, and then Faber in England bought the rights and then asked me to do the rest of the book.
Now coming to We Are Light. It's a very interesting book. Very interesting book. I will talk about more, after some time. Now, please introduce the book and its author.
Yeah, so We Are Light. It's called Wij zijn licht in Dutch, and it's by Gerda Blaze, and she is a debut writer. So this is her first novel. So I can't tell you about her other books because they don't exist yet. Although she is a poet, she has published poetry, and it did really well actually. It won some prizes, which it'll probably say some which they were: the EU Literature Prize and the Dutch Booksellers Award, and it was shortlisted for the Libris, which is a big Dutch literary prize. And it's it's almost like a murder mystery in a way, but it's not. It's a literary novel. You know what I mean? It's about a woman who dies, and it's about the circumstances surrounding her death. But it's very experimental because it's told from the perspective of all kinds of strange things, not just people like the parents and her sister, but also we are goat wool socks, we are a pen,
yes,
we are the preliminary findings, we are a cello. Yeah. We are light, obviously. Yeah.
The crime scene starts talking about it.
The crime scene itself and the story, like the plotting, also tells the story of itself. Yeah. Totally meta, yeah. But fun. I mean, it's very readable in its experimentalness.
I read somewhere that there's a backstory to it. You know, how she started writing about it, right? She read an article in a paper and started writing.
Yeah. So it's based on something that actually happened. This woman who starved to death because she was convinced that she could live on light. That's why we are light. and so she's just stopped eating, and she was convinced that the universe, that sunlight would nourish her. And so the book explores how can that happen? How can a person with a reasonable level of intelligence and a support network, really, because she has a family, her sister lives with her, and she has flatmates, but how she ends up dead.
What's interesting to me, among various other things, every chapter, all these 25 chapters, 25 different voices, every chapter starts with the we, right? The pronoun. What was the writer trying to refer to when we say we are?
Yeah, it's everything is a collective voice, and why? Yeah. So it's not I am light; it's we are light. I think maybe it's the particles of everything, in the universe. Everything's made up of lots of. I don't know. You'd have to ask Heather.
Is she referring to all of us when you say that? See, it's about self-deception and having a cult-like mentality and.
Cult-like mentality, and so I suppose we is very inclusive, isn't it? Yeah, it's also about culpability. It's about who is responsible, and was this neglect of society, the parents, the sister, the police.
As if we are all involved in the crime. I think that's the.
I mean, yes, that's a good way of seeing it. Yeah.
I had that feeling when I was reading the book. Now, 25 different voices and different perspectives. What was translating the book like?
Really good fun. Yeah.
Okay.
In the seaweed book was really good fun because it took me all over the place, and this one did, but in terms of style and approach. And they're all told in the same voice. It's all one book, obviously, and but each different narrator, collective narrator, has a slightly different style.
Even in some passages, some chapters, the sentences were longer. In some chapters, sentences were very short.
So I had to make sure that I saw that in the Dutch and didn't translate it away from it, but into it. So to keep the same patterns of narration, the same pacing, and try and get the sense of what a pen would sound like if it could talk. Or the scent of oranges. That's the funniest one.
Right.
Yeah.
See, I have seen the same book, like you said in the beginning when you are introducing the book. I have read the books where characters, the book is divided into different chapters where each character comes and starts talking about it, right? In a different point of view, their own point of view they present. But I never seen a book where there are certain things, inanimate things also start speaking in the book. That's very special, I guess, about the book.
It's very unusual. Also that the whole thing's like a murder mystery. It's a kind of detective novel in a way about how to, and you have to piece together the circumstances of the death.
And it's a short novel. It's not a very long, kind of a thing. It's, I think, about 250 pages, not more than that.
Yeah, it's quite short.
Quite short.
Let's have a look. It's 229 pages.
You had to seek any clarifications from the author when you were doing it?
Not too much. I just had a look back at my correspondence with her because I was translating this during the lockdowns, so I didn't meet her till much later. But we'd emailed, and I'd asked about the name of the commune, which is sound and love, but the word for sound in Dutch is klank. Klank is not just sound, but it's also resonance and tone. So I was never really happy with sound as a translation of clunk, but I'd never found a better solution for it in the end. I'd asked her about, when you called it sound and love commune, where did that come from, and what were the most important things you wanted to suggest with this name? Yeah. And I asked her a couple of musical things, and then actually I got a colleague, a fellow translator who is a classical musician, to read through the book and check all the music things for me, which is really useful if you've got someone to do something like that.
Yeah, the cello starts talking too.
That's right. Yeah.
What are you currently working on, Michele?
I'm working on a book called Anti-Boy. This one. It's very very short memoir for Seagull Books, which is also partly set in India. Yeah, it's a coming of gender story about Valentine who has to have a breast operation because at the time it's a she discovers that they have the breast cancer gene, and this triggers a complete reappraisal of gender, and it's a very moving short book. Be published next year, I think.
What stage are you in? You're about to finish it, or?
I'm about to finish the translation. Yeah, there's just a little bit left.
Okay, I can see that.
I'll finish it in the next 2 weeks, and then I've got a friend reading it as well, so then it will go to my second reader.
So what's your workflow like, translation workflow?
It's like a lot of juggling, because the thing is, translating books is really not very well paid, so if you need to pay the bills, and I've got 2 children as well, so I need to do other things on the side. Yeah, it's honest, isn't it?
Make it like it's very simple, very ordinary stuff that you're doing anyway. But lovely translation, let me tell you, beautifully translated. I don't know Dutch, but I really loved the way.
Yeah.
Because I only, as a reader who won't know the source language, I only look at the language and the flow of the language, how you constructed it. I really liked it.
Oh, thank you very much. Yeah.
And it's a very interesting book too, actually. Very, very interesting and thought-provoking book.
The We Are Light one. Yeah. I thought so too. Yeah. Got a really nice review in the LA Review of Books in America. Really long, serious review. It's amazing.
I think recently it has come out, right? In 23, right?
It came out this year, yeah. And Gerda went to England to promote it. She appeared at a couple of festivals this summer. Yeah.
Then please read a passage from the book, both in English and in Dutch.
Chapter 22. We are a pen. A brand new white pen with the police department's logo on the side. We have been lying on a pile of unlined A4 paper on the table in a worried woman's cell since yesterday morning, waiting for her to do something with us. Before we got here, we spent months in a large crate, along with hundreds of other identical pens, until we were taken out and moved to a pen pot that contained some pencils and a few older, more experienced pens. And now it looks like we'll finally be able to do what we have been preparing for all our short life, writing. Being held by someone between thumb, index and middle finger, placed against a piece of paper, and then making words together with the writer, maybe even sentences, even though that's not so common anymore, according to the older pens. People prefer to use their computers or telephones, whereas the older pens find an eternal shame, a loss for humankind and for penkind too, since the pen is the most direct medium to connect human to text, they say. The only medium in which the contents are contained not just in the words, but also in the way they are written. That's to say, the exact way the writer has allowed the pen to glide over the paper, hurried or slow, hesitant or self-assured, careless or precise, so that it is a genuine loss that today the pen has largely been condemned to do the writing of shopping and to-do lists, while the really important texts, like letters and even scribbled notes, are farmed out to those standoffish devices. Wij zijn een pen, een gloednieuwe witte pen met het logo van de politie op de zijkant. Sinds gisterochtend liggen we samen met een stapeltje ongelineerd A4 papier op het tafeltje in de cel van een bezorgde vrouw te wachten tot ze iets met ons gaat doen. Voordat we hier terechtkwamen, lagen we al maanden in een grote bak, samen met honderden andere identieke pennen, tot we hieruit werden gehaald en verplaatst naar een bakje met wat potloden en een paar oudere, meer ervaren pennen. En nu ziet het er dan eindelijk naar uit dat we zullen gaan doen waar we al ons hele korte leven op hebben voorbereid. Schrijven. Door iemand tussen duim, wijsvinger en middelvinger worden genomen, op een stuk papier worden geplaatst en dan samen met de schrijver woorden maken. En misschien wel zinnen. Al is dat laatste volgens de oudere pennen niet meer zo gangbaar. Daar gebruiken mensen tegenwoordig liever hun computer voor of hun telefoon. Wat de ouderen eeuwig zonde vinden. Een verlies voor mens en pen. Want de pen is het meest directe medium tussen de mens en de tekst, zeggen zij. Het enige medium waarbij je aan de woorden niet alleen de inhoud kunt aflezen van wat er is geschreven, maar ook hoe het werd opgeschreven. Dat wil zeggen, op welke exacte manier de schrijver de pen over het papier liet glijden, haastig of langzaam, aarzelend of zelfverzekerd, slordig of precies, zodat het toch een groot verlies is dat de pen vandaag de dag grotendeels beoordeeld is tot het schrijven van boodschappen en takenlijstjes, terwijl de echt belangrijke teksten, zoals brieven en zelfs kattenbelletjes, worden uitbesteed aan een van die afstandelijke apparaten.
Thank you, Michelle, for such a lovely conversation.
Okay, well, it was really nice talking to you.